Well, happy last Sunday in June. You've made it. This is the 4th of July week. I'm so glad that you are here with us. For all of you listening to our podcast, thanks for listening. And then for those of you that are joining us online, thanks for joining as well. We're in this conversation called An Introduction to Love. And what we are essentially doing is trying to give you and I a new way of understanding love that I think has the capacity to change the way we interact with everything. It's an invitation to kind of a deeper, wider, and more countercultural understanding of love, okay? And we're doing that through a particular letter written by Paul somewhere around 51 Common Eras when he started this collective in Corinth, but he's writing roughly somewhere around 55 Common Era. And I want to just be clear up front again that when we talk about this love, it typically, when you hear love, you think of like hearts and flowers and like Valentine's Day and all that's great. If you've missed the beginning of the series, you know we talked about that kind of form of love is only an emanation or a sun ray from the actual sun, right? It's an emanation of what I believe is perfect love. And so I want to read you this quote before we get back in and pick up where we left off from last week. And I'm not sure who said it, but God, it's really, really good, okay? It goes like this. This is not the hearts and flowers kind of love, but the love, capital L-O-V-E, which is cosmic, so deep and vast that it not only permeates all that is, it is also the source and sustainer of all that is. The kind of love we see all around us as we live and move and have our being in the one Jesus' life and teachings taught us is love. So when we talk about love, when I talk about an introduction to love, I'm talking about the source and sustainer of all that is. Now, I have had brushes against this love. I have had encounters with this love. Paul uses a particular Greek word called agape. That word didn't have a lot of meaning. It was only used a couple of times, roughly by Homer at one point, and then also by Plato. So it's somewhat of an unco-opted term. And part of the reason I think Paul chose that is because Paul is trying to point at something, and he wants to expand their understanding, right? So when he talks about love, he's saying, hey, I'm trying to get at love, but I want to give you a perspective of love, and the love that I'm trying to talk about isn't necessarily the love that you experience in relationship. That is certainly an emanation of it, but it's much larger, far more expansive, and far more perfect than maybe what you and I could ever imagine. Now, to get at that, he starts to write about love in 1 Corinthians 13. Now, I don't have time to go into it, but you know that this is a church that's in utter disarray. They don't agree on anything. There's a lot of fighting going on about multiple issues, and Paul is like, God, you people, you pride yourselves on how super spiritual you are. You pride yourself on being the greatest Christians, and I use that in quotes because I'm talking about modern day. Remember, back then, Paul wasn't a Christian, all right? That most of you know that if you've been around here. That if you haven't been around here, you're like, I'm sorry, what? Paul wasn't, Jesus wasn't either. They were very much so Jewish people, and they were very much so in Judaism, all right? And there was no, like, clean break between the two. So in the first century, what you have are a bunch of people that are part of Judaism, but yet they've been compelled by this man named Jesus. And so they're kind of known not as Christians, but more as people of the way, because they're still trying to find language about what is transpiring, right? But what's interesting about it is Paul says to them, you all, like, you're so determined to have proper theology. You want such good theology that you've missed in the midst of all of your division and arguments and fighting about who's right and who's wrong. You've missed the fundamental truth about what Jesus was all about. Love. This is what Paul says. Love. Love. And so, to make it clear, he writes this letter, and he addresses all kinds of issues. But in 1 Corinthians 13:1, he starts on love, and here's what he says. If I speak in the tongues of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. and if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith as to remove mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. It's pretty strong. Then he pivots and he begins to use several verbs to describe what love is. He starts out with the positive. Love is patient. Love is kind. Then he moves to the negative. This is the apophatic and cataphatic tradition that we talked about last week. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Now, here's where we left off. I want to pick up and I want to do my best to give you just two today, all right? I just want to do two, all right? So here's where we left off. He goes on to say, and love does not insist on its own way. Love is not irritable. Love is not irritable. Okay, two things. What does Paul mean when he says love does not insist on its own way? And then why would Paul say love is not irritable? Now, my theory, if I were writing a dissertation, would be that Paul puts these two together for a reason. In fact, I'm of the belief that Paul puts all these words together, and he knows exactly what he's writing, and there is no filler in this text, all right? Paul's not trying to take up space because he knows he's writing in the Bible, all right? No, Paul, every word to him matters. And it's as if Paul is like, I need to talk about how love doesn't insist on its own way. Wink, wink, nod, nod, because everyone in this collective was insisting on their own way, okay? Second to that, I'm going to put love is not irritable behind it because you and I both know if you don't get your own way, what is the consequences? You're irritable, all right? So it's like he pushes these two together. And again, hear me, when he talks about this love, though it is outside of the space-time continuum, okay, it's also very much so being worked out in real time within this collective, okay? So I want to get into these two phrases, and we'll just see where it takes us. And I don't even think I'm going to be long today. I don't think so. And if you don't give feedback, it will be really short. You haven't picked up on that yet, but if you don't give feedback, I end these things real quickly. But when you start stirring things up, it's your problem, okay? So now, all of that said, let's talk about this first phrase. Love does not insist on its own way. Now, what you know if you read the entire letter, like the letter in its entirety, what you'll realize is Paul is addressing something very specific here, okay? Now, I don't have time to go into all of like the detail of this, but let me give you just kind of a rough sketch of what's happening here. Paul seems to be addressing something specific, and what that specific thing is the issue of eating food that was sold in the markets to idols, okay? Now, let me explain a little bit of this to you. There were like what maybe you would use the phrase pagan people, all right? And I don't have time to go into redefining pagan, but we should at some point probably get into that. But pagans, all right, those who weren't like a part of Judaism or subscribing to any movement of Jesus at all, pagans would basically sacrifice their meat and dedicate their meat to their gods, okay? And then what would happen is, after they would dedicate their meat to the gods, after they would sacrifice whatever it is they had to their gods, whatever was left over, they would attempt to sell in the market. And what was happening is a lot of like those in Paul's collective that he's writing to in Corinth, they would show up at the market. If you've ever been to like a farmer's market, I love it. One of my favorite things to do. I do my best to not buy my fruit from grocery store chains. I like to go straight to it. You know what I'm talking about? And by the way, if you can't taste a difference, just hang out with me, all right, for just a little while. I can show you how different it tastes, all right? Just yesterday, I pulled up to, there's this little place on South Cobb, and it's from a farm, and they have a little setup where they sell peaches. I am a huge peach guy, and I'm like, anytime I see a homemade sign on the side of the road when I'm driving that says selling peaches, I'm like, turn here. And I pull up, and I love it because I love peaches, and then you get there, and they're like fresh from their farm, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And so we stopped yesterday, and I got like a whole thing of them. And what I love about peaches is when you get them, you're on a timetable because they go bad really fast. So I buy as many as I can, and then I'm justified to eat as many as I want. You know what I'm talking about? Well, we can't have these go bad. Like I'm just putting them down, right? Now, here's what's interesting, okay? You had like this market, basically, and it would be like me pulling up to this market and buying these peaches. Now, the question is this. Do you know where your stuff is coming from? Right? Now, that's the fundamental question. When you walk into Publix and you demand a tomato when it's not tomato season, first of all, that's sketchy, all right? Because you start having to ask questions like, how did they get here? Where did they come from? This is a little strange, all right? But whatever it is you're purchasing, you can chase the trail, all right? Where did it come from? Who farmed it? What pesticides did they use? Did I wash it? How did it get here? Was there... What kind of labor took place for this to arrive at my doorstep to be in my hands? Now, I know most of us, we don't like to think about those questions, all right? What we care about is, I need it to taste good, okay? This is kind of what's happening in the first century, but it was a little bit different. Instead of worrying about, okay, were these things harvested with good income, like people that were taken care of with wages? No. For these people, the question was, where does this food come from, and has it been offered up to false gods? Because if it's been offered up to false gods, that means it's contaminated, all right? So we don't need to partake or be a part of it. Now, check this out, okay? That was like kind of the core of Judaism, and that goes way back to the Israelites whenever they were coming out of Egypt, and a part of it was built on some really, really good anthropology. They were a small group, a small tribe of people trying to make their way, and to keep themselves clean, they did their best to avoid food that had been offered and sacrificed to idols. Now, part of the reason that is because some believed that when you ate or ingested that meat that had been sacrificed to idols, you were participating in the idolatry, okay? All right? So if you consumed a product, you were essentially agreeing to what the product was pushing. All right? And here's what's really interesting. The Jesus movement started happening, right? The people of the way. And there became this rift about what was right as it pertains to food offered to false gods. And this new movement that kept bubbling up was a group of people that were right in the heart of Judaism, but they were going, hold on a minute. I come to the market and I find a filet mignon, and I'm like, that's what I want. It looks good. And you're telling me it's a sin for me to buy that meat? And then you had another group of people going, yeah, because it's left over, because they offered it up to these idols. And if you buy that and participate in that, you are participating in that idolatry. And there were some people like in Corinth that were part of the Jesus movement going, that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Let me be clear. I have been set free. I am liberated. I will not buy into your legalism. I can do whatever it is I want to do. I can eat whatever it is I want to eat, and I can drink whatever it is I want to drink. Now, let me just pause here for just a second. Okay, everybody feeling good? You're tracking so far? Okay. Let me break it down into our modern times. Early on, when I was like a new person that was like deconstructing their faith or whatever, God, when I look back, I think about all that has transpired. And I was just recently, a friend came back into my life that I haven't seen in a while, and he was asking me about, like, hey, how did you get to where you are? Like, just perplexed in all the ways. Nothing thrills me more now than when I run into somebody and they look at me and their face is sideways going, wait, you're not remotely the same person that I used to know. I'm like, I know I'm not. And they're like, how did you become a heretic? Like, how did that happen? And I'm always just like, well, Jesus saved me. You know what I mean? Like, Jesus is why I did. He liberated me from all of the bondage that I was in. And there's no salvation quite like being saved from Christianity. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I'm just like, yeah, this is kind of my story or whatever. But it's really interesting because when you start talking to people, I remember immediately I started talking to them a little bit about like, oh, well, it kind of started with this. You know what I'm talking about? So I would love, at some point we need to do that. I need to stop the sermon and be like, tell me how you started your journey. Because most of us grew up evangelical, so we're in the faith. But then at some point things began to shift. And so the question would be, tell me when that started for you. And what was the gateway drug that threw you over the top? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, what was that? And so for some of you, it was the previous election. I can't tell you how many people I know that were teetering on the edge of like, I don't know about this evangelical world I was growing up in. And then when like they saw the epitome of the lack of integrity and character and the loyalty to something that was so far from the Sermon on the Mount that it was, for some people, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And they were like, I can't do it anymore. Others of you were long before that, right? For me, I remember I used to go to this thing that was called Catalyst. And it was like this big conference over in Gwinnett. And I remember when I used to go, I would sit there and they would have these speakers come up. And that was the first time I was ever exposed to people. And so I've probably shared this with you before, but gateway drug for me was I came out of hardcore evangelicalism. And I remember the first time I heard Andy Stanley speak, all right? He was so liberal the first time I heard him speak. I remember listening going, he can't say that. How dare him? And then I was introduced to a guy named Louis Giglio, and this was like when I was entering college too, so I was like, oh my God. But I remember my people in evangelical going, be careful. Those guys that's a slippery slope. You know what I'm talking? And I remember thinking, God, they might be right. They are. But I would go to Calais, I'd hear these guys, and I'm like, but what they're saying kind of makes sense. And then I remember like I took a step from them, and that was a great first step. I can't tell you how many hardcore evangelicals I know. They're like, where do I go first? Do not come to Vinings Lake. Whatever you do, you do not need to come here, okay? The step, don't bring your parents here, all right? I need you to hear me. When someone's growing, you do not take them all the way over here that fast. They will run so far from everything they hear here. This is why I always tell our people, no, we're not a mega church. We'll likely never be one. And part of the reason is because we're not created to be that space. I'm telling you, when I tell you we have a niche here that I'm like, man, this is our zone. We are a space for a very small, select few amount of people. And I love that about us. We know why we're here. We know what we're doing. But if you're going to take a half step, which is what I recommend, half step would be like, well, let me introduce you to these people. And so when I'm talking to my friend and he's like, where do I go from here? I can almost give you a trail, a map going, well, I would start here if I were you. And then maybe digest some of that. And then if you want more, well, just maybe go here. And I remember the next step for me was Erwin McManus. The very first time I ever heard him speak at Catalyst, he stood up. I've told you this before, but he stood up and he said, the greatest enemy to the movement of Jesus Christ is Christianity. My jaw was on the ground. But then there's a part of me going, he's right. Oh my God, I love it. So I grabbed the Kool-Aid, stirred it up with, I like it. And then years and years ago, I was at Catalyst, and all of a sudden somebody introduced some guy from Mars Hill, and a guy got up, and his name was Rob Bell, and he did this whole thing on Jewish culture and da-da-da-da. And then I remember before Rob, it was, they brought a guy up, and he was dressed in like these raggedy clothes, and he got up there, and he talked with this East Tennessee accent that was intense. He says, hi, my name's Shane Claiborne. And I remember he wrote a book at the time, and he wore a shirt that said, God loves women preachers. And he was at a conference where there was not one female speaking. And I remember going, I like that guy. And I digested some of him, and then I digested some of Rob. And then at some point, I was out speaking somewhere. Somebody, you ever heard of Brian McLaren? I'm like, never heard of this guy. Read this book. And I'm like, and then I started digesting some of him. And the next thing I know, like the books were laid down, and I was well on my way. You know what I mean? To full just heresy, debauchery, the whole thing. Like I was just well on my way. And that's like what is so amazing. It's like you go on this journey, and a part of it is you have to go on your journey. Go on it. Now, most of you know my story, and I don't have time to go into it, but I did hit a wall on the other side. I want you to know that. I ran as far and as free and as fast as I could, only to hit a wall, look up, and realize it was very similar to the exact same space I just left. It was like same fundamentalism, just different beliefs. It's like we swapped fundamentalisms. So I learned so much, but I had to just run on my journey. Now, I say all that to say to you, the biggest thing early on, when I first started this journey, even at Vinings Lake when we first started, LGBTQI plus conversations, not even a thing. No one was even ready for those conversations, maybe a few. Can I tell you where we were? And this will show you how far we've come. I remember the first time ever telling someone I had a sip of alcohol. You would have thought I had just lost my salvation. Do you know what I'm talking about? I remember getting a scalding email. Still have it. One day it might make it in a book. But I got a scalding email from someone going, as a pastor, you should be ashamed of yourself. How dare you stand up and tell the truth that you have actually placed your lips on a drink of alcohol. And I remember that being such a big deal early on in my faith. And maybe if you're here and you're like, I didn't grow up that way, good for you, all right? But growing up evangelical, that was a big deal. And I came out of a church that was, they called them teetotalers. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do y'all know what? Kevin knows what a teetotaler is. But I came out as teetotaler, and he was like, why drinking alcohol is a sin. Drinking alcohol is a sin. And I'm going to be honest, I came out of that, and I remember my first drink. And by the way, if you're here and you're like in AA, oh, dear God, just hang with me. You know how I feel, all right? And we're going somewhere with this. But I remember my first sip, and when I remember even then, I arrived at a place where I had a clean conscience going, maybe this isn't the devil. Maybe it's okay. And I had to wrestle with my conscience, like maybe it is. And I had a group of guys around me. They didn't know anything about moderation. My friends didn't. And so they were like, well, you should try it. But if you're going to try it, try it. And I was like, I don't understand what that means. And so they brought me an actual bottle of bourbon was how they wanted me to start, okay? And I remember just taking my first sip of it. No one was like, ease in here, all right? Like, you probably just want to, get, just like a Michelob Ultra. Nope. Just ease it on in. Like, they were like, no, you should try. And I sipped it, and I had to tell you this. I remember in that moment, just sipping it, and I was like, oh my God, there's part of my body was like, this is really good. And I love, harsh stuff, so it went down. But here, even more amazing than all that, you know what I did? I slept like a baby that night. I mean, I slept so good. I woke up the next morning, and check it out. My conscience was good, better than it's ever been. I was like, we're good. And slowly over time, I started growing, learning, expanding, and realized, oh my God, they would have all these proof texts about alcohol, but then I found all these other proof texts that were saying the exact opposite about alcohol in the text. And I thought, oh, that's because humans wrote the Bible and they all come with all these different perspectives. And I also realized over time that part of the reason the generation before us was so staunch teetotaler is because many of them, all they had ever seen was alcohol being abused. That's it. My parents grew up in alcoholic homes. My mom grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad grew up in an alcoholic home. So all they knew was dad coming home completely blissed out of his mind and beating all of them. So yeah, of course, the natural response would be ban that because it destroyed my family. But what begins to happen is over time you begin to grow up and you don't need the laws per se anymore. Because the reason you had the laws is because you didn't know better, but now you've grown, you've matured, you realize, oh, actually, alcohol isn't a lot different than social media or any other thing. We could all look at it and go, be careful, it's dangerous. I wish someone had told us that about social media. Be careful. Make sure your child is of age before you give them the device, because it is very dangerous. And check it out, like anything in life, yeah, you can abuse it. So be very careful. And I begin to learn what moderation is. And I begin to learn, actually, in the scriptures, there's a lot around alcohol and joy. And then I learned that Jesus turned out that when he came and did his first miracle in the text, it says he turned water into wine. For years, my people told me he turned water into grape juice. For years. And I was like, well, yeah, of course it's grape juice. And then it occurred to me, oh my God, the actual Greek here is not, there wasn't Welch's. It was actual wine. And then the theologian would get to, yeah, but let's talk about the fermentation process in the first century. I'm like, guys, cut it out. You and I both know Jesus loved some good wine. He did, because he saw it as like a symbol of joy. Yes, it can be. You can have a glass. You can have a margarita, sit around a table and laugh with people. You can do that. You know why? Because you have the freedom to do that. Now, I say all of that because I'm driving this point home. Check it out. This is what's happening in the first century in Corinth. You basically have a bunch of people that have been liberated. And they've experienced and tasted of freedom. And now they're going, Paul, half the collective is saying we can't do this. The other half is like, we can do what we want. We can eat what we want. We're free. Which one is it? And so they're fighting over the theological belief. They're fighting over that some believed it was a sin and some believed it wasn't. Others believed that it wasn't just not a sin, but they would say, actually, just because this is leftover food that were sacrificed to the idols, you think it's contaminated. And here's what some in the collective said. I probably would have been with them. They said, it's not only not contaminated, but actually you've missed it because there's no such thing as contamination. It's all holy. It's all sacred. So drink up, eat up. It's good to be human. And the divine is in all of it. But they're not agreeing. And so what does Paul say? This is the larger part of the letter. Paul says, friends, eat whatever you want. Does that surprise you a little bit? Because this is like Paul, who many have pinned him against the wall for saying some very harsh things. But Paul is the voice of liberation here going, you're free to eat whatever you want. It will not define who you are. Have at it. But he puts a little mark right underneath it. I'll just read you his words. This is in chapter 10 of the same book we're in. He says, all things are permitted, but not all things are beneficial. Oh, boy, that's a Books and Bonfire line. All things are permitted, but not all. Now, can we just pause here? That's a pretty smooth move from Paul, isn't it? So you might be looking at you going, yeah, do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. All things are permitted, but I just need to tell you something. Not all things are beneficial. That is the nuance of the Bible right there. We want it so clear. Just tell me, is it right or wrong? Is it right? Cody, tell me, is this right or wrong? All things are permitted, but not all things are beneficial. I also like to call that wisdom. Yeah. All things are permitted. He says it again. You know, the crowd that was over here that disagreed was like, say it again, Paul. All things are permitted. Give me my alcohol. All things are permitted. But then I love this. He says, he phrases it a little different, but not all things build up. And then in verse 24, do not seek your own advantage, but that of the other. What a sobering, wise word for all of us. That sometimes that new insight, that new way you see the world, that new worldview, that new freedom that you've tasted, you've experienced, if we're not careful and we don't use wisdom, sometimes that can be the very thing that gets in the way of other people experiencing their own awakening. And so maybe like the wisdom here is don't flaunt your freedom in front of those who are still in bondage. It's not helping. In fact, it might actually be helping them digress. So I want to pause here and then we'll get into this. Are we good? Oh, I love it. I love it. The intensity is so palpable. All right. Here's some questions. Here's some questions. It's very easy, and then we're going to land this thing. And God, another great Sunday. I don't know. We keep having these. Okay. Here's the question, and I'm gonna ask it this way. Have you ever had anyone try to convert you to something? Okay, let's just stop. Let's just stop here just a moment. We have a friend here who I asked that, and he thought I was asking it. And he responds, and he says, yes, vegan. Now, since he's opened the floor, let's just open the floor for a minute. No mics here, but just fire it out. It's okay. Has anyone ever tried to convert you to something? And tell me what that thing is they try to convert you. Go ahead. You're free. Anybody. I'll start and just say, I have tried to be converted to being a conservative evangelical Christian on many times. Okay? Okay. Anybody else? Doesn't have to be that deep. We got vegan here. Anything else that needs to come out? Let's just get it out. Okay? Let's get it out. Anybody? Oh, so you're left-handed, and you've tried to be converted to be right-handed. That's interesting. You ever wonder why someone would lose sleep over why Tony's not? Like, I need you to. That's a whole sermon. Like, why would that ever bother someone? You ever thought? What? You ever wondered, like with Kevin here? It's like, I need to convert you to be a vegan. Like, this is what. Most of you probably even had that before. I've been converted in many ways, and sometimes it's worked. Sometimes it works. I used to hate mushrooms. I hated them, like food. I grew up in my house, and we're like, "Ooh, that's disgusting. Stay away from mushrooms. It's like a fungus. Don't eat that. That's gross." And then I met Katie, and here's what I've learned about marriage: slowly over time. Over time, it is a very slow conversion, and over time, you wake up one day after like 21 years of marriage and you're like, what happened to me? Where did I go? I realize, oh, it's very subtle. But she has transformed me into the person she dreamed that I would become. You know what I'm talking about? And here's the thing. Coincidentally, I love them now. All right? I could go on and on. I mean, the fundamental idea here is, if you've ever had anyone try to convert you, or maybe you've even used statements like this, I just can't get that person to fill in the blank. Have you ever had anyone try to get you to see something, believe something, get something, do something, listen to something, or read something? I can't tell you how many times on the family text feed someone has sent a message of a daily devotion, which, to be clear, is a passive-aggressive way to try to get you to see something, right? Now, we're not at us yet. We're still talking about others trying to convert us. I'm going to get to you trying to convert other people. That's where we're heading. Newsflash, if you need to leave now, okay? But I'm talking about people trying to convert us. It's not pleasant, is it? It's not pleasant. I can't tell you how many YouTube videos have been passed to me. I can't tell you how many YouTube shorts have been passed to me with 30-second blurbs that someone needed me to see. I can't tell you how many books have been sent to me. I can't tell you how many books have been accidentally left in my house. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you ever had parents leave a book somewhere and it was like a passive-aggressive way of saying, oops, did you read it? Okay. Now let's just pause here. How do you feel when someone is persistent, insistent, pestering you about whatever the subject is? I know for me, I have had occasion after occasion after occasion till I'm blue in the face of people that have tried to convince me that the path I'm on in my life is wrong. I have had people try to save me, convert me, and demand that I see the world the way they see the world. Now, let's flip it. Do you have someone in your life who isn't living your plan for their life? Do you have someone in your life right now who isn't living your plan for their life? Now, I just want to pause here and just talk about uninvited spaces for a minute. Because typically when someone steps into your world and they persist, insist, and pester you and try to convert you to a particular worldview or whatever it is they need to persuade you to believe, it's usually self-appointed specialists that attempt to diagnose and fix your problem that they've spotted. And generally, not always, but generally individuals who do not know you, that's usually who they are, which I find interesting. The people that have tried to convert me the most are the people who have no idea who I am. And yet they feel compelled to tell you. And in their defense, let me come to their defense for just a minute. In their defense, many of them are simply sharing what has actually helped them. But they have, at some level, forgotten that every body is different, and every mind is different, and every path is different. And so, I'm not talking this morning about if someone asks for your help, help them. Yes. If someone's seeking guidance, guide them. Yes. But you know what may be the line between what Paul is getting at here is maybe it's this. Have you been invited? Has the invitation been sent out to you? This is good for us to hear. I know it's Sunday and it's the last Sunday of June and you're like, bro, we just came to have a good time. I know, but it's good for us to hear this. Here's a little commandment that I wrote out. Now, this started with my anxiety because when I went public with my panic disorder, I was amazed at the number of people that prescribe drugs to me. You know what I'm saying? And I'm about prescribing drugs. I'm like, listen, it's actually not complicated. I can save you, and here's the formula. Amino acids. Or here's the formula. You just need to start eating more broccoli. Or here's the formula. You need to do whatever it was. And I remember at some point going, oh, they're coming from a good place. But then at some level, I got real weary. And then it dawned on me, oh, I never asked for their prescription. Not one time did I ask, hey, will you give me advice on my anxiety? And so here's a commandment that I wrote down. Thou shalt never write prescriptions. Do you hear that? That's probably a good mantra for us. Thou shalt never write prescriptions. Maybe you could word it like this. Do not share your perspective unless you are asked to do so. Now, I know if we're sitting in a books and bonfire, like, well, we need to talk about that one, and we can talk about it. Just not today, all right? But we can talk about it. But it's been my experience that the reason I say this is because it only does more damage when you share something with someone when they never asked your advice or opinion to begin with. And this is what is so problematic with social media to me. And I don't have the answer. I'm only just telling you my observation. That the danger of social media is you're sharing ideas to people that you don't even know. And the question is, are they even remotely capable of handling what it is you're saying? Yeah. Now, you might be sitting here going, yeah, but if I don't try to convert them or get them to see this, then who will? Who will? And I just want to say this to you. A couple thoughts. First of all, people with a high need to control others are generally doing it as a way of dealing with the lack of control they are experiencing within themselves. I just speak that from experience. People with a high need to control others are generally doing it as a way of dealing with the lack of control they are experiencing within themselves. Converting people can present itself as the most selfless act when in actuality it is one of the most selfish acts. So what do? Well, maybe loving people means letting people go on their own journey. Maybe love lets people go their own way. Maybe love lets people take their own path. And maybe love is always present on that path, whatever that path is. And maybe love will be present at the end of their path. But what I can tell you is love is not anxious about their path. And I can tell you from my experience with love that love never insists on its own way. Love just is. And I think that's why Paul goes on to say love is not irritable. It's not easily upset. Anybody get easily upset? It's not easily offended. When's the last time you were offended? It's not easily angered. It's not easily annoyed. When was the last time you were annoyed? You're like, right now. It's not easily bothered. It doesn't have like crass and snappish behavior. Love does not get upset at the actions of others. I know, love doesn't. Love is never grumpy. That's my version of 1 Corinthians 13. And so the fundamental question is, when he says love is not irritable, it's because he knows what he's talking about here. How much of life do you spend and I spend frustrated? How much of life do you spend disgruntled? And what I want to say to you is frustration usually comes from something not being the way you expected it to be. Frustration usually comes when someone is not doing what you need them to be doing. And what I want you to know is I believe Paul is getting at something here. He's saying love doesn't do expectations. Love simply loves things exactly as they are, with no conditions. Love is open, expansive. It's not bothered, concerned, or frustrated with anything or anyone. And love does not manipulate. Love does not hurt. Love doesn't do harsh. Love simply does what love is. It loves. So if you're here going, wow, thanks for making me feel small, because I'm very frustrated. I do try to tell people and insist on my way, and I'm guilty of everything you're saying. So thank you, Pastor, for the sermon on love, because I really feel loved today. And here's what I would say to you. Love's not judging you right now. You are judging you. This pastor isn't judging you. I'm with you. I felt the same impulse when I read this. Well, I felt that. And then it occurred to me, love is not judging me, it's me judging me. It also occurred to me, and this may be new for you, but I don't think love is asking you to try harder. I hear sermons like this, and my fundamental impulse sometimes is, I just got to do better. I got to try harder. So I'm just gonna fast tomorrow. I just got to work really hard, but I can get there. I can get there. For years. I mean, this is somewhat new for me. I mean, fresh off the press, I should probably hold it in my body for a little while before I share it, but you all are mature people. I, for years, had this ideal version of what spirituality is supposed to be. And I could point to people like Ram Dass or the Dalai Lama or whoever, Mother Teresa, Jesus, doesn't matter, the Buddha, just point to him like, yes. And then what is new for me, what's happening over time is love is teaching me this truth. Anytime you think you're not that and you're trying to be something, that is not love. Because love never asks you to try to be. Love just fully embraces you exactly as you are. It does. And here's how it works, and this is why it's so fascinating. Love doesn't judge you for your selfishness. Love is present with you in your selfishness. Love doesn't even try to correct you from your selfishness. Love is simply in your selfishness, being what love is and doing what love does, being patient and kind and loving you exactly as you are. And it is in the isness of love that we are transformed into the likeness of love. I need you to hear that because I hope you don't misread me here. It's not that anything goes. It's that the way love works, and this has been my experience and my brush with love, is that love doesn't stand on top of you as we understand love, judging you, going, you shouldn't do this, and you should do this, and you shouldn't be this, but you need to be more loving. That is not love. I can tell you if you've ever done anything and you've felt something and you've gone, oh God, I got to do better. I got to do better. Great. I just want you to know underneath that impulse is love. And love doesn't say you got to do better. Love is doing what love does. It is just there in its isness. But check it out. What's so remarkable about love is that it doesn't judge us and insist on its own way, yet because it doesn't, we want to change. Does that make sense to you? It's like love doesn't force its way on you, but because love embraces us exactly where we are, we initiate within ourselves to want to be better humans. You know why? Because it's when love just does what love does and embraces us and takes us in all of whatever it is we're coming with. It's in that moment that we are actually transformed. And that's what love does. It transforms us not through bribes and threats. Love transforms us because it says, I'm here, patient and kind. And check it out. You can take your own path and go wherever you want to go and believe whatever you want to believe. And newsflash, love, still there. Still there. Still there. Any path you go down, love still there. Take the prodigal son for an example. You know that great story, right? He goes off, spends all the money, and he has this moment in the pig pen. And check it out. You know what the moment was? The text says he comes to himself. What does that mean? He realizes that right in the midst of the slop, you know what is found there? Love. Love. Love never forsook him or abandoned him. Love was present with him in all the directions he went. Okay. Now, I say all that to give, I guess, maybe the benediction, all right? So what do we do? If love doesn't insist on its own way, and if I'm operating out of love, then perhaps I don't insist on my way. Then what about people who are heading down a path that will lead to destruction? Now, I need you to hear me. I'm not talking about speaking up for the marginalized. I'm not talking about major issues of injustice here. I'm not speaking of that, okay? I'm talking about like relational conflict here, okay? Take the pressure off of yourself and come to this truth. You're not here to convert anyone of anything. I know that might be new to some of you. Yeah, but. By the way, the weight of the world can come off your shoulders, and you can breathe a lot better when you realize your job is not that coworker. Can I give you a permission slip? Your job is not to save that person. That is the job of the divine. Your job, in my opinion, is to love that person. Now, we can get into what that looks like, but let's just take a hypothetical. Yep, when your kids are growing, wonderful. Guide them, show them a path, but there will come a time, and I only know this because all of you had that time, where you will hit an age and you will start, for the first time, taking your own path. And inevitably, there's like a rub. And what happens is you begin to have internal conversations going, I don't know if I like this. I don't know if I like the direction this person is heading. So what do? Well, you could insist on your way. Anybody in here ever insisted on their way? God, it's a lot tougher today than I thought it would be, honestly. I was coming in like it's going to be kind of smooth. It's working on me. Have you ever insisted on your way? This is the way it's going to be. You can like it, not like it, but I'm laying down the law. Good for you. Good for you. I just want you to know this. You can do that. Remember what Paul said? All things are permissible. But I just want you to consider something. How beneficial is that? It's been my experience this is my experience, that love doesn't operate that way. It's my experience that love is patient and kind and just opens the floor going, hey, you can go whatever direction you want. I do want to tell you, if you go that way, there will be consequences to your actions. But I also want to tell you, if you go that way, my love will still be present right here with you. Can I tell you something that's been so remarkable about my mom and dad in recent days? They're getting older. We're all getting older. Whatever old means, I don't know anymore. But they're coming like to a season in their life where so many of my friends are experiencing this right now. They're coming to a season in their life where they're realizing that what mattered more than church, what mattered more than their theology, what mattered more than their political beliefs were relationships in their lives. And you have to take that for what it's worth, but it's been my experience as a pastor sitting around deathbeds, and I have sat around many of them, that ultimately in all of them, somehow it all came back down to relationships and people they love. And did they know they were loved? Did they not know they were loved? Did they say it enough? Did they show it enough? Did they not? And I can tell you, I just read an article in The Atlantic like this week about estranged relationships over the last few years in politics, and how parents are no longer talking to kids, and kids no longer have a relationship with their parents. And sometimes that's necessary. You need to go through seasons with boundaries and all that stuff. Yep. But I also want you to know, God, there's something so liberating when two people look at each other and go, hey, I just want you to know this. And they say it to you also. I am choosing this relationship over all that divides us. It doesn't mean you don't have your beliefs, and it doesn't mean that you are converted by them or you're trying to convert them. It just simply means that you are choosing to stay in a relationship of love with that person. And here's how I found a way to do that. If love doesn't insist on its own way, then what do we do? And here's the phrase I have. I think the only thing we can do is let people have their trip. Let them go. That kid of yours, let them go. Love does not insist on its own way, but love lets you go wherever you choose to go. And maybe for you today, the message is let them go. Let them go. That mother, let her go. But love is not irritable. But that post, love is patient. Love is kind. When I say let them go, I know that sounds really easy. Maybe we should say it like this. Entrust them to love. That's it. Entrust them to love. I would imagine right now, sitting in this room, you could think of a list of 5 people, all of you going, man, the path that person, they're trying to convert me to right. Just what would it look like right now? Here's the question. Who do you need to entrust to love today? Who do you need to entrust to love today? And the question is, how do we entrust someone to love? Here's one simple way. By surrendering your attempt to control them. How do you know if you've entrusted someone to love today? Have you tried to control them today? Surrender your attempt to control them. Give them autonomy. Let them be what it is they want to be, do what it is they want to do. And here's been my experience. When you entrust someone to love, you know love's going to take care of them. Love's going to take care of them. I close with words from Felicia Morel. You know Felicia Morel, she's amazing. Let's close with her words. She says, I am constantly challenged in my life by one burning question. Do I trust love? Do I trust that love will lead me? Do I trust that love will lead those I care about? Do I trust that love will lead me and those I care about into love's embrace? Do I trust the energy of spirit to participate with love, even when it seems like I or someone I love is derailing from the path I envisioned? And that's the question for all of us today. Do I trust love? Do you trust love?